about 11 or 12 years ago that a new technology was supposed to be introduced into the public that was supposed to be as revolutionizing as the smartphone. And this technology actually scared me a lot, to the point that it was probably the Kickstarter that got me interested into privacy and brought me on the journey of being in this room today. This technology was Google Glass. Now, I had just recently graduated from college. My mom had just created a Facebook account, and I was used to my friends constantly taking pictures and putting them online. And I thought, wow, if we had a technology that people would just record everything that they saw, I would lose all of my privacy. My mom would see everything, and that's really what kind of scared me. And along this journey, I found that one of the most interesting dynamic situations, conflicts, scenarios with privacy is information security. In some ways, they work together. In other ways, they conflict. And given the recent changes in digitalization, the sophistication of malicious actors, and the changes to how organizations and enterprises deal with their operational landscape and how workers fit inside that has radically changed, to the point where the conflict between privacy and security is only going to get greater. And that's the reason why we are here today, is to talk about this conflict. And I hope at the end of this conversation that you guys will learn a little bit about it, get some practical knowledge on where this conflict is deriving from, what are things going to happen in the future, and some takeaways on how to better think about this situation, and some things that you can already do within your organization or wherever you guys want to go forward with your careers. So that kind of lays the introduction to this. But we wanted to start off with, stating that this is supposed to be a workshop. So we do want to get some interaction from you. We want to invite you guys to talk amongst yourselves when we present some questions, ask us questions, and really go forward with just making sure that this is as lively and interactive as possible. And if you guys have questions along the way that the presentation goes, please raise your hand and we'll try to answer them. But we do have a question and open discussion section at the end. So just to start off, my name is Justin Norman. I'm a lawyer from the United States, and I went to the UK to get a master's. And at this point, the GDPR had come out, but in the United States, there wasn't very many privacy laws. California was really just in its draft mode, and people were kind of doubting whether it was going to happen or not. So I came to Belgium to be part of the, experience the GDPR and really learn how the regulations here, and then hopefully can go back around seeing the Brussels effect and how this applies to the rest of the world. Also, my colleagues, I'll introduce them. They don't have a privacy lawyer background. They're much more IT security specialists.
Hello, everyone. So I'm the nerd, the guy that works with computers, and more in general with cybersecurity. So don't ask me anything about laws because I won't be able to answer. I leave that up to him and you. But I am a senior manager within Deloitte, and I lead a team of ethical hackers, which means that we try to hack our clients to try and improve their security and demonstrate what are the potential flaws within their systems before they get exploited by bad guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bielders. I'm a manager in our Deloitte Belgium cyber practice. I'm in the same team as Arthur, but my focus is more in the overlap between simulating attacks and helping our clients that way, or really helping our clients to defend against these attacks. So I'm more in the cover in the overlap areas like threat hunting and creating security detection.
Okay. And we wanted to start off with a brief example of how organizations can monitor their employees. And this is something I did not know until I started working with these guys over here.
Yeah.
So
But to do the demo, please give us a little bit of time to prepare it.
So we've prepared a live demo to show a bit the differences and the potential overlap that exists between cybersecurity and privacy. You know, organizations nowadays, they have to cover their assets, and a lot of the time assets means intellectual property. I'm not in reinventing the wheel, you all know this. And all of their workers, their employees, have some share of that potential intellectual property on their computers. So how do you make sure that each and every employee doesn't leak that information? Well, you have several technology. You have technology like data loss prevention, and other things, but how do you make sure that if the traffic is encrypted, you know, if you're trying to send an attachment to Google, to Gmail, from your corporate laptop, how does your company know that you're exfiltrating data? This is where this technology comes from, and this is where it is. But it means, in effect, that the companies where this system is implemented can read encrypted traffic. So when you go into Gmail and you type in your email and you think everything's nice and secure because you've got a nice padlock, maybe not. Yeah.
Is it like about encrypting the communication between the laptop and some company central service with one certificate, and then like decrypt it and re-encrypt it with a public certificate, and then at this point you can basically read everything.
Yeah, indeed. So in essence, what this means, and Tim can take over afterwards, is that while you think you're communicating with any service online, and you think that the encryption works, the company or the person that set up your computer with this actually has set up a man in the middle, a position in the middle between the two, where they decrypt all of your traffic, see what's inside, and then it goes outside to the internet.
Very well. Can you hear me? You can keep looking at the screen. It's fine. So, indeed, it was indeed a situation that was already mentioned in the group, but I wanted to demonstrate how you can also see for yourself now or soon or this evening. So we have a website. Is it Dropbox or Gmail or some other websites are more interesting than others, but for security teams, leaking information to, for example, to Dropbox is quite interesting to monitor. So I took this example. Just going to put it. I don't know if I can zoom in, but I hope you can see it. So there's a padlock here. It's really small. I know. Sorry. Okay. Here you can see Chrome saying your connection is secure, and this is the certificate being used. And here, if you open it, you see a lot of technical information saying this connection is signed by DigiCert, and we trust DigiCert because we have to trust some party to secure our communication. So we and systems trust some organizations to issue these certificates so that we can be sure that it's actually the right Dropbox we're communicating with. So this is how you would see it if you would be at home or just in a normal environment communicating directly to Dropbox. Now I'm going to switch to my colleague's laptop, who hasn't disabled our corporate controls because I might have. Oops. Voila. So I did the same here. The screen is loading in my colleague's laptop. It's loading. I'm really not sure if you can read it or not, but it's not the same. It's issued by some organization called Deloitte Pilot. Chair. So this means that I'm trusting, well, my organization as the party for this encrypted communication, so to speak, and it's like indeed that was mentioned in the audience that my communication from my laptop is first being intercepted by some system, some service owned by Deloitte or purchased by Deloitte to intercept the communication, to do some security filtering or security checking, and then that component is going to the internet, to the actual Dropbox and Gmail. So, voila, that was to show it. Then I promise for the rest of the workshop we have our normal presentation, so no more ad hoc demo. Thank you for facilitating our request here. So the question was also, what can we now see? What is intercepted? And in fact, it's all the internet traffic that's being intercepted. Yes, all the internet traffic, everything you send to Dropbox or Gmail or all the other sites we need to check to make sure that everything you do is secure. Do we save all of this information? No, we don't save all of this information because we would have too much information. So we're more focused on which sites you go to, or the users of our organizations go to, so that we can make sure they're not going to malicious websites, not going to phishing websites. And then for file sharing sites, we want to maybe see if they're sharing confidential information. So we're looking at maybe some parameters and the metadata in the content, just to make sure that there's no information leakage going on. And this happens at a great rate, at very high speed. We have specific security devices to do this. And these security devices are made to work really, really quick. So they have to drop a lot of information just to do the purpose that they are meant to do, and then save only what really needs to be saved. I'm not sure if you want to add, or if you should continue to the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, no, I would just like to highlight that when I first learned this, even as a privacy professional, I had no clue. I really didn't know that if I was to use my laptop on a weekend and I went on my Gmail account, my office is getting and intercepting all of that data. And to me, I was like, okay, wow, how does that really comply with the GDPR?
And this is one of the arguments that is being used by companies that are selling those things. IBM, for example, made the claim a couple of years ago, when I still worked for them, that they could record every single packet, every single traffic that was going through. So that they could, even if you were to pass a phone call through Teams, Skype, whatever, they could reconstruct that phone call and listen to your voice. So it works. It's implemented in pretty much every major organization. And from a privacy perspective, it creates an interesting conundrum between cybersecurity and privacy, of course.
So just here, we were just curious if you guys could talk amongst the people next to you and just introduce yourself and also say what your background is. And then after you do that for like a minute or so, if anyone with a cybersecurity background could raise their hand. So, just talk next to the people next to you and introduce yourself and yeah.
I'm going to give this back.
Yeah. Doing a good job, I guess. I guess I don't need this here anymore. I feel so weird clicking this thing.
Happy with the demo?
I think so. And I'm glad there's more than 3 people here.
At least there is one person that understood what we were talking about.
Yeah. But it's also the point, so that because they probably don't know. So. Let's give it another 20 seconds.
I don't know if they can hear us properly, but we'll make it work.
Stand up there to get everyone's attention. Okay. Okay, guys. That doesn't work.
He has to turn it on.
He's manually turning it on.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So, does anyone here have a cybersecurity background? Yay! Okay. So 2 people raised their hand, which I think is really interesting, given the fact that security and privacy are so interrelated. The fact that by the GDPR and other data protection regulations, you need to have adequate security. You need to have, by the GDPR, Article 24 and 32, implement technical and organizational measures that need to match the processing activities. And then also, with Article 5, the fairness principle also would come in here. And I think that this is even more highlighted about the idea of fairness, given the fact that the Federal Trade Commission in the United States entered the privacy regulation, domain, stating to Article 5 of the Fair Trade Commission Act that it's unfair to process personal data without having adequate protection. You can also deal with the same underlying concepts of CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And the terms data protection and privacy are sometimes interused or used interchangeably. However, that's not necessarily always the case. There are some strong conflicts, and there are different competing views that are really important to understand. When you're dealing about security, and what these guys mostly focus on doesn't always relate specifically to privacy. It talks about different types of data, and they have a different goal and a different obligation than what privacy lawyers, compliance officers, or data protection officers have. And this conflict is, like I mentioned, it's really going to start pushing on each other. And the conflict's only going to grow. And I have a quote here from the European Data Protection Supervisor from an opinion that they have about the proposed regulation for increased cybersecurity measures for EU institutions. Now, it's a really long quote, so give you some time to read it, but to sum it up, it basically says that they believe controllers don't understand that certain cybersecurity logs and information that is collected is personal data. And they say that controllers don't understand essentially what data minimization is and what purpose limitation is. And all of these things still need to apply even when you want to increase cybersecurity. So again, we wanted you guys to interact. Have you encountered this conflict at all? beforehand? Is this something that you guys see when you talk about at your school or when you talk about your job? Or have you had a conversation with the Chief Information Security Officer where this topic has come up? Also, given the quote, do you think that controllers really don't understand that it's personal data, that a log is personal data? Or do you think it's something else?
Well, I would say, well, I do. I
You can use the mic, sorry.
I'm Claudia. I work in a pharmaceutical company as a privacy officer. And actually, I do have that discussion from time to time. And in Germany, for instance, we have the situation that the Works Council is very particular about employees and them being controlled. And so sometimes they ask me, about topics, what is actually feasible in terms of cybersecurity, and how much control is there, and how can we actually influence this? And I work in a huge corporation, and there a lot of systems are being implemented from global level. And this is more the point that there are so many legislations that actually play a role, that it is difficult to balance out the different legislations. So as a controller, we are aware that, of course, there is personal data. And it is a constant struggle, I would say, and more a constant discussion of how to approach this, or what could be a better way for doing this or that. And for instance, in terms of legislation in certain regions, just to say, okay, we have this particular situation here, and maybe at that time now we need to do something about it, or something like that. And so it is ongoing, I think, and probably will be. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other viewpoint?
So I am a student, and my background is in security intelligence. So I will not touch from this very practical level because I don't have this kind of experience. But from, let's say, a philosophical academic point of view, I would say that there's something else going on, because I do believe that the controls really do understand that we are processing your personal data. They are very aware of that. And the thing is that with this concept of security, it's very easy to get into a slippery slope, because you just want more and more. And hence more things in your pore, more security you can ensure to your audience. And as a provider, there's this kind of inherent, let's say, instinct or intuitive that, yes, we do have to process more personal data in order to secure better environment as a security provider. So that's my point.
Thank you. Also, it'll be interesting to see, especially in the German context, there's been a lot of data protection authorities calling out for a specialized regulation for processing employee data for Germany. And so it'll also be interesting to see how they tackle this issue, because this is one of the reasons why they're actually calling for it. So it'll be cool. So also the reasons why we want to talk about some things that are happening in the future, also why we think that this conflict is going to continue to grow. And one of those things is the concept of zero trust. Zero trust is a cybersecurity architecture or strategy. It's not really like an out-of-the-box tool or anything that you can just strictly just put in and done. We often do zero trust projects where we design a roadmap for organizations to go down, and it takes over several years for them to build up their maturity in the different zero trust domains. But the essential reason why we have zero trust, it's not a new concept. It's just that we're now in a situation where we need to start actually applying it. Basically, the old idea was to have a perimeter. You would set up your firewalls and say, okay, we will protect everything that's inside. And this was a lot easier when people were working from the office or when it was a less complex cloud situation. It's pretty much been determined that a hybrid cloud is the preferred infrastructure setup for lots of organizations. And you're just constantly spreading the attack surface. And so you can kind of go from the idea of, okay, now we're not just protecting the castle, but now we have a bunch of rooms inside, and each of those rooms have different locks. But one of the things about zero trust is the idea of never trust, always verify, and least privilege principle. And with these two, I guess, overarching principles within zero trust require there to be a lot of personal data processed. You need to know who is accessing what at a very finite level, and why should they be able to access that? And new technologies are coming in where they also do behavior analytics on top of this to help determine whether you should get access, and this idea of just-in-time access. So if you were to be logging on from a different location and you entered into a file that you would normally not enter into, they might then change your access rights throughout the organization because they think that you could be a threat from inside, or that you could just, either you could be proposed as a hacker, or you could just be an inside malicious actor.
A very good example of that is something that happened, I think, 2 years ago. Somebody was working for the client that I was working with, and all of a sudden, this account logged in from, I think it was Ghana in Africa. And immediately it raised an alert. Because why is there a connection from Ghana? Well, the person never traveled to there. That person always stayed in Europe for work, and they automatically disabled her account. But that means that they knew where that person was. So they had to know the identity, the location, and the time. From a corporate perspective. Interesting.
And one thing that's also kind of interesting on this topic is that there's been a proposed regulation from the EU that we'll highlight in a second that says that all European institutions need to start developing a zero trust architecture. Additionally, Joe Biden in the United States put out an executive order saying that all federal institutions in the United States need to start adopting a zero trust architecture. And this is also due to the fact that malicious actors are becoming more and more skilled and making it harder to detect where they are and stop them from getting in. Also, in coordination with the zero trust architecture, we have new AI technologies, AI cybersecurity technologies. And before there was a lot of playbooks or rules where if this happens, then the system or network would do this, more of just an automated response. Now, the cybersecurity technologies are helping to prioritize, flag, and do low-bearing fruit, I would say, for SOC experts. There's a number of cybersecurity technologies down at the bottom. Each of them do a slightly different thing. Some are about detecting malware. Some is about network detection and response. Some is about phishing emails. So essentially, almost all cybersecurity technologies now have a component that is AI. Recently, we asked one of these providers to come to our office and show off their AI technology. A lot of this was kind of over my head. I'm more the lawyer side, they're more the tech side. So Arthur, what did you think about the presentation?
The presentation itself was interesting because it was about a technology that is supposed to replace and has been replacing for the past years antivirus. Who amongst you have heard about a technology called EDR? Event Detection and Response. I see a couple of nods. Back in the days when I was young, not that I'm that old, I think, but nevertheless, an antivirus was all you needed. And in essence, what an antivirus is that it's looks at the program, sees, is it in the list of naughty programs? And if not, all good. Now, the EDRs, the way they work is that they look at what the software actually does, and it tries to determine whether or not it's a malicious software. How do they do that? Well, a program, a computer in itself is quite dumb, right? Zeros and ones, it doesn't understand anything. So you have to teach it how to see what is malicious and what isn't. And the only way that we've figured out to do so right now is to provide it millions of information about what is good and what isn't, based on real life examples, based on user data. So that provider bought from either another provider or gathered from their clients normal and abnormal behavior. And usually that information is gathered and written in small letters in the contract when you sign up for that software. So they gather information about what you're doing to train their model to detect potentially bad behavior. Microsoft has been doing that for years. As soon as they switched from Windows 7 to Windows 8, they started gathering analytics data. And if you don't know, they're trying to gather your location, they're trying to gather the way you're using your computer, the schedule you're using your computer, these kind of things. And they're building that gigantic pool of data to determine what is normal and what is not normal. So what I thought interesting with that provider is that it was a fairly recent provider. It was a fairly recent company, and they built that tool. So they didn't have lots and lots of personal data at hand. So where did it come from? Did they buy it? Probably. They weren't very clear when I asked the question, which I found interesting.
Yeah. And then Tim has some experience working in a security operations center, so maybe he can also give a comment on what is it like to work in a security operations center and whether these technologies are going to actually be useful.
Good question. There are a lot of things going on in an organization. Of course, more the things you see, but also the things are computer systems, network, everything is a big jungle of zeros and ones. A lot of things are happening. You do this times a big organization, and you're pretty overwhelmed with all the data that there is, and you're trying to make sense of what's bad, what's wrong with the tools that help, and you try to build it into alerts, to alert when something is not going as planned or something that you look into. And if you don't do that correctly, you get so many alerts that you don't even look anymore at the alerts, and then the purpose of the alert is of course completely gone. So we try to prioritize, we try to optimize, and every tiny bit of piece of help we can get, is it with AI, is it with some prioritization, it helps, because we're only with a small team. Experienced profiles are scarce on the market. We're trying to do as much as we can. That's why also a lot of companies go with external providers for security services, since these security providers can do everything in bulk for multiple clients and save time on resources and costs. And all of these tools will help us to be better, to be more efficient, and to detect more attacks in the limited time and resources that we have to focus on, really on the things that we have to focus on. You want me to give some more examples? Or? Time? Okay, good.
So you can't really see so much on some of this because it's pretty far back, but this is taken from some of the commercials on these AI technologies. The top one says extracting intelligence from a global network of 30 million users. So this company is, as Arthur said, is processing personal data of 30 million users and using it to determine whether another future email is phishing or not. Granted, this to me seems not really compliant with the GDPR. Also, when you look at what the tool looks like, here you really can't see, but it says that they've processed 3.6 million emails of their employees. And you can see the subject names, the senders, whether there was attachments to those files or not. Additionally, another detection, AI cybersecurity technology called Darktrace. A lot of these technologies kind of should scream red flags if you're a privacy professional. I mean, even with a name called Darktrace, it sounds a little bit creepy. And then additionally, one of their slogans is, learns every user's every pattern of life. And again, they want to know exactly how all users are doing something. They create an AI model of every user. And if you do something outside of that model, there will be an anomaly, and then they'll get sent to the SOC team.
But Justin, what are you talking about? This is great. This will help us enormous, because I don't have to process all of these phishing emails myself anymore. We have a tool that can help us detect patterns, block things automatically. This is great.
And this also shows the difference in the two mindsets between what a cybersecurity specialist thinks and what a privacy professional thinks. So again, we'll let you guys break off into the people next to you, but have you guys ever encountered AI cybersecurity technology? Have you ever done an impact assessment on a cybersecurity technology? Go ahead. Go for it. Or we can just take an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple how it works, because somebody from security team proposes a tool, yeah, which has an AI component. So maybe you will monitor some log files, whatever collection, yeah. Why data protection suffers here is because DPO typically by law cannot prohibit anything. DPO in a company can only advise. Yeah. So and if you then it's just GDPR definition. Yeah. So if afterwards the authority will be notified, yeah, because somebody employee will raise this issue, yeah, authority will come in and they will find that the practices are incompliant, and authority can prohibit, like can tell you to stop processing, yeah. But that's very difficult because the company can argue that they do it under legitimate interest to protect, you know, security, yeah, and they don't process this data for any other purposes other than monitor alerts and so on, yeah, and this discussion can go 1 to 2 years. So in these years, you can replace the tool, you can, you know, the employee may not be in the company anymore, whatever, yeah. So at worst, you will get away with a warning from the Data Protection Authority that you maybe did not notify employees extensively enough about it, yeah. But in general, then the conversation is also, okay, with the employees, why you think that the company should not do it, yeah? If we will encounter a big data breach because we don't have these monitoring tools and the company will go down, then this will be the fault, yeah, of that. So that's why this discussion between like security and privacy, it basically very often ends in the legitimate interest, and maybe constraining some accesses, constraining some data which is being processed and so on, but not in general is like, oh, no, not collect the data.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a remark, because I think the question is great and it's very simple and straightforward, but you know, me being an academic and having, or like right now I'm thinking about developing a course where I teach to 19-year-old kids which type of methodologies to use to carry out something like that. And DPIA sounds great, but I mean, the law is not telling you how to do that in practice. It just gives you an indication when to do it. So I'm wondering, like, if you have any smart answers to that. There are different models for DPIAs. That's even not the difficult part. I think the difficult part is if you add AI cybersecurity, because there's also going to be a conformity assessment AI Act. There's like plenty of people who put out like impact assessment or beyond impact assessments methodologies. So really the question then is, so how to do this in terms of which types of models? And I'm fine with the plural, but not 500 to use.
Yeah, so we'll get a little bit into answering your question towards the end when we give some practical examples that I think that everyone could leverage going forward. But on the idea of a DPIA or an assessment, one thing that they are trying to discuss right now with the AI Act is whether you would actually have to do two different assessments. If you could do one assessment and that would be compliant for both. That hasn't really been determined, so we'll see what happens with that. I also expect there'll be other types of assessments going forward, so I think this is something that the regulators do need to think about going forward. Also on a preferred method of a DPIA, we'll talk a little bit more about that on maybe guiding principles on what to focus on. But yeah, usually a DPIA, like if you look at the Working Party's 29 guidance, they kind of do a pretty good job laying out all the different aspects that you should look at. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but hopefully with the information that we'll add on at the end, it'll be more productive. Okay, so why do we need this data and these tools?
So somebody wise once told me that a presentation with a picture of a cat is remembered well and better than a boring presentation with slides. So here is your cat, right? So you can remember the presentation now. For the people that prefer dogs, there is a dog. But more seriously, I guess all of you, and I hope all of you, can recognize which one is a cat, right? What is this question? Who's this stupid guy asking questions like this? The reason why I'm asking is because it's super easy for you, right? Because you're human, hopefully. And for a computer, differentiating between a cat and a dog is terribly difficult. Is it a cat facing front, towards the window, towards Tim? The computer doesn't know. It's just a set of pixels. And a pixel is just a value, red, green, and blue. How does it know it's a cat, it's a dog? It doesn't. So the way a computer is trained is that, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's given billions, millions of times different pictures of cats and dogs. And you're saying, yeah, okay, but that's great. That's just pretty innocent. But for security technology, this is what's happening with user behavior as well. I think from my perspective, the biggest advancement in terms of cybersecurity from a hacker perspective is the technology that I already alluded to earlier, called EDR, because it is just a jump forward in cybersecurity for organization, such a major jump forward that it makes my life a real pain, because it will detect if I am trying to hack them because the user wouldn't do what I'm trying to do. But to be to that state, it was given so much information that from a privacy perspective, it's already questionable. And one of the things that we're trying to do as hackers is to blend in. And to blend in, one of the techniques that we've done is to, maybe, bear with us, there we go, is to use normal communication channels. So the text at the top is just a series of random words. Don't try and make sense. And the text at the bottom is just a legitimate sentence. There again, for you, it's super easy to differentiate which one is which. For a computer, it's super hard. But when my malware, when my virus communicates with my server, I use Teams, or I use Zooms, or I use any other communication tool that the organization uses so that I blend in. So that a computer without that AI model wouldn't be able to detect me trying to hack their computers. So I use things like that to be able to compromise organization and demonstrate what are the flaws. Now, That being said, is the company that, as you mentioned earlier, should the security of the company be a priority? And should that model that has been using and that is being trained constantly with user data be implemented, knowing that it will spy on users? And should we implement this knowing that it is the most important piece of security tool that can counter me with my attacks like this? It's an interesting question because as from his perspective, he's probably going to say no. From my perspective, I'm probably going to say no. But he's going to say, yes, please have this tool because I want to protect the company.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting here is if you could communicate across the network and with malware via Teams, how else do you stop that except for being able to process Teams conversations and not looking in and seeing, okay, what is every employee actually saying across the network? And then, Tim, what were you going to say?
Well, we have another image, I think. Yeah. So some scenarios that related to and also to prove that there is a lot of data to collect is for example, you have a new chessboard like you can see on the picture. Probably people at the end can't see that there's a little spy between the chess pieces. Also, for a computer, it's quite hard to see. So we want to spot the intruder, collect a lot of data on how a chess piece should look like. And this can translate to certain scenarios, like for example, you have a nice supply chain with 20 steps, and suddenly one is replaced by a malicious step who looks almost exactly the same as you can see in the picture. How can we help the organizations to detect these anomalies? How can we see if there is an attack taking place without knowing how everything should look like? Or another final example is like this is an image of your organization. How do we spot the intruder? Because attackers are being so stealthy, they are being so clever and smart, and I hope your organizations didn't have to deal with very smart attackers yet. But how we need tools, we need data to spot what is going on. And like these Teams communication channels is like the hot new techniques that the attackers use, and we have to follow. We have to build our own tools to keep playing this cat and mouse game.
So we briefly touched on the regulatory maze obligations and the conflicts there. So I'm not going to spend so much time on this, but I did want to highlight you have some cybersecurity regulations, you have some industry-specific regulations that also say you need to have better security, and then you have the GDPR, and especially those articles on the other side. And again, you're going to be forced to adopt the zero trust technology, but then at the same time, how do you ensure that you're complying with the GDPR? And if you do have both of those obligations, what should the organization do to satisfy that? Should they say it's better to go for the zero trust architecture and get a GDPR fine, or is it better to go the other route? I don't think we have a 100% answer on that, but what we do expect is that this is only going to continue to increase. So this was already commented on, but should an employee's privacy be compromised for the customer's data? Is there an expectation of the employee to already know that they're going to be monitored by their workforce? And does that mean that essentially the organization has a higher loyalty or higher duty to their customers and not to their employees? And how do you guys think about that? Do you think that just knowing that you are an employee of an organization, that you should say, yeah, I lose my privacy rights because I think that our company should be protecting our customers' data?
Hi, so I'm Reis from Leiden University. So I think there are a couple of factors that would be relevant when you consider how much of a privacy intrusion employees should suffer. First is whether they are using their own devices versus when they are using company devices. I would assume when they're using company devices, there is a lower expectation of privacy, right? And also, like, I think from like a employee fraud perspective, where companies often have to conduct internal investigations into employees, it becomes sort of the balance tilts towards the company, because when they're conducting an internal investigation, they might have to process more data than they would do normally. So I think these factors would weigh in such a consideration, and like generally as an employee you might have a lesser expectation of privacy than if you're a third party or a customer, I would say.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other opinions?
I do. The tax laws in Belgium. I know nothing about them because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant or whatever. But I know that my company allows me to use my corporate laptop for personal use. How do they differentiate when I'm using it for personal use if they have those technologies on?
So I'm working in a corporation that's not necessarily tech related, and in general, we do not encourage of using your personal phone. And me as a lawyer, I would never use the company phone for personal use because honestly, I expect whenever like that they will do that. But I think it's also because of the mentality that I have, because I'm coming from an East Europe country where they used to spy a lot on people. So I really don't trust people, but the zero trust policy for me actually goes in my personal life too. But as a matter of fact, whenever you're using your own device for company, there are also a lot of softwares that allows you to put a wall between the personal use and not the personal use. And even in my company phone, there are a lot of things that I cannot do. For example, if I copy paste or if I want to send from special folders to Outlook or Teams, I cannot do that. So I don't know if actually these walls are, I don't know, technically proof or not, or they still have access to the personal side of your phone.
That's why I have two phones as well. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, me as well.
Can I ask the question in this context?
Sure.
But I think this is a little bit like a jumping to a solution, yeah? Because if we elaborate on requirements, so if you have, let's say you have a company and the company says, okay, we monitor, yeah, then the requirement would be also to tell the employees pretty extensively what you are doing, yeah, and it should not feel creepy, hopefully, yeah,
Hopefully.
to the employees, yeah. But then if you communicate, okay, guys, you can use your private device, just be aware that it's also like co-monitored because you cannot whitelist all possible websites and so on, yeah. So it's your decision whether you kind of trust the company to treat this data in the right way, or you just don't do it. Yeah. So maybe if the requirement of the company to distinguish and to treat really personal data completely, private data, yeah, completely independent, then maybe the security team will tell it's not doable. Yeah, and then you will work on other type of solutions. So. Is it something which you consider on a case-by-case basis, or is it like always the requirement that you kind of have to distinguish private versus non-private?
It is almost impossible to distinguish between private and non-private, because you need again another AI model to try and distinguish between private, and at that time we're just going in circle. Because we need an AI model to look into the data to see if it's private or not private, to see if it's security related or not. That makes no sense. So I think you can, as an employee, say, I accept that my company will monitor, but also can you, as an employee, give genuine consent?
Now the lawyers will.
They will hunt you.
No. Hi, I'm ex-Deloitte as well, so hi, colleagues. This question has a couple of questions, but first starting with the consent. So employee consent for such things, according to actually the GDPR guidance, is invalid because it's unbalanced. Can I start answering your questions, step by step? So organizations do have different obligations towards their employees. You can bring your own device policy, you can have many different policies around that. Is there reasonable expectation for an employee to be monitored? Yes, of course. I mean, it's an obligation for companies to actually ensure respect with their policies. And let's be honest, there is not only data protection policy, you have some policies around ethics, you have obligation for cybersecurity. So yes, it's normal, but I don't understand what you mean by extensively.
Well, I guess that's what we're kind of talking about when we say extensively is when you layer all the different types of technologies, they get to see a lot of what you're doing. So it's not just the first SSL inspection that we showed, but when you combine the different technologies that are available, you're basically they have the ability to do live knowledge of everything that you're doing.
Yeah, but if I remember correctly, the different guidances, there is an answer to that. It should be a gradual approach, meaning that you anonymize pseudonymize to the extent possible, and then the access should be given only in proportionate cases. So maybe this is the answer to your question, having an approach that creates, a proportionality assessment.
Now, from a technical perspective,
Yeah.
you want to anonymize the data. Sure, fine. How do you make sure that if our cybersecurity tool find out that the account is compromised, we need to be able to find that person?
Yeah, of course, but you're not gonna do this immediately and get access immediately. So
No.
you will start the procedure of really checking who is the person only if there is legitimate, suspicion. No, isn't? I mean, how does it work into technical practice?
In practice, we have been able to demonstrate that some companies can be fully compromised in less than an hour.
Okay, and how do you?
So what that means is that if you don't have access fast to that data, the cybersecurity tool is not effective.
And what do you see exactly? Like you see the name of the person?
You see the computer, see the name, you see the location, you can potentially see which websites they visited, which email they received, where they are, for how long they've been connected.
Or that you Googled.
Yeah, no, it's a super good, how you put it, the conflict between cyber and privacy. So thanks.
But also some of the tools that are being used right now, there isn't really a pseudo-anonymization in there, but I think there can be room because, like you say, like only have access to the specific username when you really have to, or that you just know some broad information like this user is from this team, so we can expect these or these kinds of things. But currently, the current market leader in tools, they do not have support for any of this.
This is not implemented at all.
Okay, so do you have a question?
No,
go for it.
Sorry.
No worries.
No, my question is, do organizations like yourself actually track your employees, and do they profile then in that case? Because if you're trying to balance it out, I'm asking because technically you would be identifying those people whose data you have, because reasonable expectation wise, I'm sure these questions came with a thought, right?
Well, all of our big clients do, and I'm not going to discuss to what extent Deloitte does, but Deloitte does also monitor for cybersecurity. So, yes, it is a real question that happens every day and that we are facing. And from my perspective, not being a lawyer, not being a privacy specialist, until I met this guy who was like, this is freaky. I was like, this is great.
Okay, so how to better handle this conflict? Just want to first mention that this is going to continue to get more complex. There's going to be more regulatory maze, and also the technological landscape is changing. Just like why we needed to start adopting zero trust technologies, the same is going on now. ChatPTG has already been proven to be able to write polymorphic malicious code, so code that will change its cryptography to stay hidden within an organization. And this means that lots of people who don't have the knowledge to build these type of codes now do. So you're increasing the threat actors, you're increasing the threat landscape, and therefore it's just gonna get crazier. So these are 6 steps, so 6 different ways that we think that we can lower the risks and help deal with this issue. Granted, these are not 100% proven to make any drastic changes. I don't believe that there's going to be something that's going to solve this conflict. But I do believe that these 6 things will help organizations and also help tackle the harder issues and also deal with supervising authorities. The first one being develop and draft required documentation to a high level. Currently what we see is, we'll have an example next, of a legitimate interest assessment that is 2 sentences long. To me, that doesn't capture the whole surrounding context of cybersecurity. I think if an organization does want to have these tools implemented, they need to do a good job of explaining why it's so important. It might be worth saying that there's been an 8% increase in ransomware attacks in this first quarter of 2023 alone. That there is a high shortage of cybersecurity professionals. That the technology on the malicious actor side is increasing. So there's not enough, in my opinion, explanations on why we need to even have these tools. It's just that organizations just kind of say, we need them, we have them. Our interest overrides yours. And I think if the Data Protection Authority sees that, they're going to find that you're really not doing it fairly. And that's going to go against the principles. But if you explain more, it will show that you are taking the due diligence and that you're doing more, I would say, fair. Again, this is not something that's going to just change the Data Protection Authority's opinion, but it is something that's going to help. And then strong holistic data governance, ensuring that all the individuals, the cybersecurity specialists, the privacy employees, C-level officials, come together and talk about these topics. Also on the specific notion of Deloitte and our private use of personal computers. They give it to us for a tax benefit. But maybe they should take a different situation and think, hey, we're gonna not let you use your computer for private use, and we will monitor everything that you do on your computer. But I don't know at Deloitte whether the people that were ultimately making this decision did a cost-benefit analysis at the tax break versus the GDPR implications. Technical and organizational measures on top of technical and organizational measures. This is something that could be, that you alluded to, maybe you can do some type of masking, something else to ensure that not all the private personal data is being processed in the open. But there's other organizational measures that can also be implemented, such as having really strong policies that explain to the data subjects what is happening. We've also seen organizations say, well, we don't want to explain all this to the data subject or to the employees because we know it's going to have an adverse effect on their performance and their morale. If that's your outlook, how are you going to say that you're complying with the GDPR and fairness? If you know that this processing activity is going to have a negative impact on the workforce and you choose not to tell them, you're violating the GDPR. So there I would also say use the guiding principles as your baseline. Always think back to, is this fair? Are you being transparent? I think another thing is common language. I think this is one of the things that's been really nice about me and Arthur and Tim. You know, we've got to experience each other's different work experience, and I've learned a lot from them. And ensuring that your CISOs and your DPOs know how to talk about the exact same thing. As I mentioned earlier, the word data protection means something a little bit different to a privacy professional than it does to a cybersecurity professional. So ensuring that everyone knows the common language and can have real discussions about this is a great step forward. And another thing that we could all start doing is starting to review the privacy policies and acceptable use policies. I do think that most organizations can improve them, and also that would go towards the other principles of showing transparency. Sometimes you see some really broad, vague terms in a privacy policy, such as we monitor for immoral behavior. To me, that doesn't go far enough in explaining to the data subject or the employee what can actually be implemented and known to them. So again, this is what, it is a long quote, but this is a legitimate interest assessment that we have seen on this topic.
Justin, I think we have to be mindful of the time as well. I don't know what time it is.
Oh shoot, sorry guys. But yeah, so it essentially just says that this X Corp believes that they know, well, that they know they'll have an infringement on the data subject's fundamental rights. However, they just feel that their interest in protecting their data, their IP, their employees' data, their customers' data is overriding. Boom, that's all they're gonna do, done. To me, that's not good enough. I don't know if we have time to fully answer this question, so we can open it up, but what does the future hold? There will be further increased digitalization. That again, that means the attack surface will increase. There will be more sophisticated attacks. The regulations will also increase again. There will be more increase in AI cybersecurity technologies. They will get better, but they will be continuing to process more personal data. And the maturity of the supervising authorities will get better. Currently, I think this is something that is lacking. There was recent an opinion of a Belgian court that stated that all asylum interviews, or people that applied for asylum during COVID that had an interview via Teams, it was found to be non-confidential because they think that personal data is going to the United States and therefore doesn't fully comply with the GDPR because some telemetry data on the individual is being sent over to the United States. But their ultimate decision was, we actually don't know. We need to find out. We need to do a further investigation on this topic. I would also say, on average, just data protection authorities and courts don't know this story and this situation very well, which also goes to say, if you do a better job documenting it, and your reasons why, you can dictate the conversation to them. You know, you want to make sure that you are the source of authority to something that they don't know. And then they will be looking to you on how to solve the problem instead of themselves. So again, I don't think there is a silver bullet that will solve the issue. To totality of circumstances, in the future there's going to be even more unknowns, more awareness. But I think the going away message is really this: remain diligent on the topic, as again, there's going to be a lot of things that are changing, a lot of increases in the future. So make sure that this is something that you guys stay on top of, because I really believe that this conflict is only growing, and it's going to eventually hit a point to where the German data protection authorities are calling out, we need a specialized regulation in this, because we can't currently solve it, and we don't know how the GDPR really applies. Work together. Again, I feel super blessed to have Arthur and Tim as my colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, I've learned a lot from them, and I think that all of us need to work with this topic and really talk to our cybersecurity experts, figure out what they're doing and how it actually works. It's something that I think that privacy professionals are extremely lacking in. I don't see a lot of technological knowledge, and I think that's something that all of us need to improve upon. And then also be human-centric. I heard a lot of interesting things this conference about duty of loyalty or imbalance of power. And I think when you think about those things, that's really what this comes down to. It's what should an organization do with the personal data? What duty do they have to us? What duty do we have to our clients? And how should we protect ourselves? And I think that's really, again, what the GDPR and their human rights interest comes from in this, is that it's about us and how do we want to have this going forward. And it's solving the situation is only going to be as much as we want to put into it and how much we as privacy professionals can dictate the conversation.
Phew.
So we do have, I think, like 3 minutes or so. Does anyone have any questions or conversations? I do think it would also be awesome if you guys asked Arthur and Tim more technical related things. But yeah.
Arthur, Tim, I don't know how much you guys have looked into the Cyber Resilience Act proposal, but like it's basically has certain instructions on how like products with digital elements should have essential cybersecurity requirements, like limiting attack surfaces, ensuring the CIA triad and all. Do you think these like broad-based guidelines on how products should be cyberly secure, will they like in any way contribute to providing clarity to the manufacturers on how they should actually achieve cybersecurity? That's my question.
Broad guidelines lead to interpretation and lead to misinterpretation, should I say. In my experience, if you leave any room to play, you're not gonna get the desired objective. You have to understand as well that a corporation, like I was alluding to Microsoft earlier, collecting data. By default, your Windows collects, I think it's one packet of data every 5 seconds about where you are, what you're doing, etc. So if you don't disable it, it's by default like this. This amount of data is a huge revenue for them. If you don't put real guidelines that are pretty well defined, those organizations that have massive revenue driven by that data and by that amount of information, they're gonna find a loophole to make sure that they can keep that revenue coming. And truth be told, I understand why. So broad regulation, unclear regulation, I don't think will solve the problem. Does that answer the question? Any other one? It's time. We're kicked out, I think.
Thank you all.
Thank you.